Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the national anthem. Please remain standing for the invocation.
Almighty and ever-living God, creator of all things in heaven and earth, and the source of every blessing, we give you thanks for the wonders of your creation, for all the beauty that surrounds us, for the gift of life. And we give you thanks for granting us the varied gifts with which you endowed us to serve you in this world. We especially pray at this time for our nation, Barbados, our leaders in government, in industry and commerce, our religious leaders, our families. We pray for peace in this nation, and we ask your guidance in this session that everything that is said and done may be a reflection of your glory. Amen.
Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, I have much pleasure in welcoming all those here and online who are participating in this town hall meeting. My sincere thanks to the media for promoting this event and for being present this evening. The commissioners on the panel for this evening's session are Commissioner Senator the Reverend Dr. John Rogers and Commissioner Cahill Kathiwalda, who is the lead commissioner for this session. The panel is joined by Ms. Sharada Granum, a public officer and a former member of the Republic Status Transition Advisory Committee and a member of the subcommittee who drafted the Charter of Barbados. Other commissioners who are present and in the audience are Commissioner Christopher De Caires and Commissioner Suleiman Balboulia. I thought I saw the secretary come in, did I? No? Not yet. I offer an excuse for the absence of Commissioner Sade Jimot and Deputy Chair Senator Gregory Nichols. I also acknowledge the presence of the Executive Officer to the Commission, Ms. Atkins, who's busy giving out copies of our handbook. This meeting, ladies and gentlemen, is a continuation of the meetings held earlier this year under the theme Have Your Say. However, the focus tonight and on the nights which will follow is on the Constitution itself, and tonight we're looking on the focus on the preamble to the Constitution and the appropriate place of the Charter in the Constitution. Before I pass the chairmanship of the proceedings to Commissioner Kathiwalda, I'm obliged to make two observations. The first is to remind you that your contribution shall neither be abusive or libelous. The second relates to observing the requirement of time to make a presentation. Now, there are a lot of you, but for consistency, you will see a timer showing the countdown of your time, at the end of which a bell will sound. You may return to make a contribution later on in the proceedings if time permits and others wish to speak. But if you persist in ignoring the timer, the technicians will cut your mic. I look forward to your cooperation, and I now pass the chairmanship of the proceedings to Commissioner Kathy Wilder. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Justice Blackman, Chair of the Constitutional Reform Commission. And it is my pleasure to join the Chairman in greeting you all with good night and welcoming you to this yet another town hall and public meeting of the Constitutional Reform Commission. As you are aware, before today, we have had 3 town halls already. And those public meetings have been more general in nature, in that they have allowed members of the public to come to us directly and have your say on any matter that is related to the Constitution. Going forward, as we move into the second phase of public engagement, the Commission will now be undertaking its remit on a thematic or chapter-by-chapter basis. You will recall that in the lead-up to the establishment of the Commission, both the Prime Minister and the Attorney General indicated to the public that they would have the opportunity to weigh in a structured way that would be done chapter by chapter. And to that extent, the Commission is now undertaking that. And so we begin today not so much with a chapter, but with the preamble to the Constitution. And I will say a little bit more about that in a few moments. But just before that, in addition to the comments which the Chair has made, there are also a few questions that many of us get quite a lot about the process of the Commission, and I thought that I would use the opportunity of these opening remarks to address some of those issues that persons have raised. As you are aware, the Commission was appointed in late June, and since then we have been involved in a significant amount of organizational planning in building out the internal capacity of the Commission, and that includes, for example, we have had a number of internal training sessions led by some of the most notable scholars in this field in constitutional law, and we hope to continue that process. We have begun these town halls. We have taken to the airwaves as one way of reaching the public. We have hosted shows on both Down to Brass Tacks and on Q100.7. And we have also written to a comprehensive list of civil society organizations in Barbados and inviting submissions from these organizations on what they would like to see in a new constitution. And we have begun to receive quite a number of those submissions in return. With regard to the public, beyond these town hall meetings, we have sought to find a way to engage with Barbadians using as many modalities as possible, recognizing that people will want to engage in very different ways. And so you have town halls, but you may also write to us in the older way of writing by letter. And you may write in care of the Director General of Governance at the 2nd floor of the E. Humphrey Walcott building at the corner of Culloden Road and Collimer Rock in St. Michael. You will find this information on our website, crcbarbados.com. And I encourage you to visit the website, but I'll speak about the website in a moment. You may also write to us by email, as many of you have been doing already, constitutionalreform@barbados.gov.bb. We've begun to receive quite a number of submissions, and I have been asked the question, are we actually going to read them? And I can say to you that not only are we going to read them, but I believe I can speak on behalf of my colleagues when I say that we have read all submissions that have come to us thus far, because we are sent them right away, essentially, and we review them and we review them over the course of time. And so we have reviewed all submissions so far, and we will continue to review your written submissions. But also, you have the ability to also call us, because we recognize that not everyone is going to want to put their thoughts into writing, but some persons are better at speaking. And so, in fact, the idea of the hotline was not generated in-house by the Commission, but was the result of a public engagement where we had one of our programs on brass tacks, I believe it was, and one of the callers or WhatsAppers suggested that we look into having a hotline. The Commission listened. We considered it and thought that it was actually, in fact, a very good idea. And so we tasked the Director General, very hardworking lady, Ms. Atkins, and her office with setting up the arrangements for that. And today we have the hotline. And on that hotline, you call, you leave your name, and so that in the event that we want to get back to you for anything, and you can then leave your submission. It's automated, so it's recorded, and it is there. The hotline number is 536-1250. And I believe that from time to time, this information should be showing up on the lower part of your screen. Not only are you calling us, but only today, actually, we received the report of all of the submissions that we have received orally on that hotline. And so we are keeping tabs, therefore, on all of the various ways in which you can engage us. So you can be assured that we will consider everything before us. I can't say to you that I cannot look into the future in terms of telling you what will be the basis of our report or what will be the basis of the draft constitution that will be drafted. But I can certainly assure you that when it comes time for decision making, all submissions will contend, and we will consider everything in the fullness of time. We have tonight, our focus will be on the preamble to the Constitution of Barbados. The preamble, as you are aware, I'm sure, is a very important introductory statement to legal documents, and in this case, a constitution. And it sets out and declares the principles of that document. It sets out what is it that the people who will be governed by this constitution, what do they believe in? What do they stand for, and what do they stand by? And there was a time when we thought that preambles were just words on a page to add certain poetic meaning to documents. But in recent times, the Caribbean Court of Justice has elevated the importance of preambles and now recognized them as essential interpretive parts of law and of constitutions. And so the preamble occupies an important place because it provides a mechanism for courts to be able to interpret the constitution that follows in light of those basic and fundamental principles. And added to that, we are also discussing tonight the Charter of Barbados. And as you are aware, last year, the Republican Status Transition Advisory Committee, and I'll get to that in a moment, drafted a new charter for Barbados, and that was the subject of a parliamentary resolution which passed last year, and that coincided with our Republican transition. Yes, and in fact, the chair reminds me that we are pretty much at the first anniversary of the passage of the charter. And so the charter sought to encapsulate and set out the values of Barbados and who we are, as they say these days, who we are and who we want to be. And so the question tonight is, are there elements of the charter that we ought to incorporate into the preamble to the Constitution of Barbados? Is there a general spirit of that charter, a general spirit of Barbados that we want to infuse throughout the Constitution? And those are the questions that we wish to examine with you tonight. And to help us do that, we have begun a new feature of these town hall meetings, in that we will now feature an external resource person. And so to my left, I beg your pardon, to my left, I sometimes mix them up. To my left, I have Ms. Sharita Granham, who was a member of the Republican Status Transition Advisory Committee, and who with Senator Reverend Dr. Rogers, who was also a member, they both co-chaired the Committee on fundamental principle, the subcommittee on fundamental principles, rights, and freedoms, which was the subcommittee of our STAC that drafted the Charter of Barbados that we have with us today. And so Ms. Granum is very well placed to provide us with context as to the Charter, as well as the content of the Charter. Ms. Granum is a cultural strategist, and she works in the Office of the Prime Minister. She's the project manager of the Reclaiming Our Atlantic Destiny program, which, as you are aware, is a project designed at reestablishing tangible links between Barbados and the continent, Africa. And her work has provided support over the years to the National COVID Social Response Unit, the Working Group on Africa, the National Task Force on Reparations, the CARICOM Prime Ministerial Subcommittee for Reparations, the NCF, and indeed she was a member of our STAC. I should tell you that Sharita is the first Barbadian who earned the designation of United Nations Fellow for the International Decade for People of African Descent. And so we have in our midst a very distinguished Barbadian who I'm sure will be able to contextualize the Charter for us. And so I now invite Sharita to provide some opening remarks.
So good evening, and thank you so much, Khalil, for that very humbling introduction. So thank you to all of you for taking the time to come out this evening and participate. This process, as Khalil and of course Chairman of the Commission alluded to, is extremely important, and your participation and contribution is invaluable. So just to give you some background and to address a number of the areas that Khalil spoke to that we'll be covering this evening, I'll start with the remit of the subcommittee which I chaired, and the work of the public consultations which were co-chaired by my former colleague to my left, Senator Reverend Dr. John Rogers. And oh, I'm sorry, I was told I needed to speak up. Is this any better? You can just nod. Yes? Thank you. All right. So very soon after the Republic Status Transition Advisory Committee was established in March of 2021, a number of subcommittees were formed to focus on very specific components of that committee. I will refer to it as RSTAC going forward, components of RSTAC's very large mandate. The subcommittee which I chaired was assigned in matters related to fundamental principles, rights, and freedoms. And my fellow subcommittee members would have included Senator Reverend Dr. John Rogers, the Most Honorable Patrick Frost, the Honorable Lolita Applewhite, and I see Mr. Suleiman Bulbulia here present with us this evening. And I want to take this opportunity very early on to acknowledge and thank former chairman of our STAC, Dr. Marion Williams, and other fellow committee members who each would have made invaluable contributions throughout the process. Ms. Shirley Bell, Ms. Cindy Marshall, Mr. Adrian Green, Ms. Cecile Humphrey, and of course special mention to then Cabinet Secretary Mr. Hewlin Allman and Professor Cynthia Barrow-Giles for their outstanding service to the committee. So getting into what the core focus of the subcommittee dealt with when we addressed matters of fundamental principles, rights, and freedoms. Our focus was to review the recommendations related to fundamental principles and responsibilities and fundamental rights and freedoms as outlined in the reports of the 1979 Cox Commission and the 1998 Ford Commission, as well as all related draft or discussion bills or acts, to identify and research specific matters of duties, rights, freedoms within the context of Barbados's 21st century experience and our future ambitions, and to make recommendations for their inclusion within the Constitution, to facilitate public consultation on matters related to the constitutional duties, rights, and ambitions, with a particular emphasis on the engagement of the millennial and Gen Z generations in national conversations. And that is notable because, as you will recall, the last Constitutional Reform Commission would have been 1998. I'm not great at math, but I know that 1998 till last year meant that people 40 years and younger would not have had any real opportunity to have any substantive engagement or contribution to a national conversation around constitutional reform. So this is truly a great time for those two generations to become involved and to participate in the civic matters of Barbados. And lastly, to study and inquire into the corresponding legal instruments which relate to the fundamental rights and freedoms, and in the absence of such, to make recommendations for their consideration. So one of the very early positions that was adopted by the subcommittee was that fundamental principles and responsibilities should be considered the spirit of the Constitution, as was outlined in the 1998 Ford Commission report. The subcommittee would have continued to review the relevant recommendations and documents, and also set out to compile and examine a number of bodies of research of areas of immediate concern, namely matters of human sexuality and religious perspectives, human trafficking, modern-day slavery, child labor. We did global constitutional comparisons on their approach to fundamental rights and freedoms, examined the language of inclusivity as outlined in the 1998 Ford report and the 2004 draft Republic of Barbados Constitution Act, and identified very specific gaps. One thing that stood out in that particular analysis was the matter of citizenship and privacy. We examined the dissonance between public opinion and matters of fundamental rights and freedoms, and the role of the state in the protection of such rights and freedoms. Matters of racial discrimination, new media literacy, that list is not exhaustive. But you get an idea of the level of analysis that went into these matters. We took it very seriously. So after that extensive research and discussions on these various things, the committee noted a number of perceived weaknesses, either by way of omissions in content, context, or inappropriateness in language. And the research and the discussion on those areas gave rise to the idea of a charter for 21st century Barbados and 21st century Barbadians, one that would enshrine the traditional rights, freedoms, and obligations, and also embrace new and emerging rights, freedoms, and obligations. So, to get a little bit more specific, the committee supported the Ford Commission's justifications and recommendations around the inclusion of non-justiciable principles as a general policy framework. All non-justiciable means is that it's not actionable in court. It is largely symbolic. And a framework that shapes how the governance of Barbados is undertaken within our constitution. We noted that it was very necessary to point out that inextricable link between the responsibilities of both citizen and state to citizen in the process of enshrining and enjoyment of fundamental rights and freedoms. The committee's recommendation, however, was that that relationship between fundamental principles and fundamental rights and freedoms might be better articulated in the form of a charter that would act as a national benchmark for progress and an affirmation of our most proudly held values, one that would maintain that non-justiciable nature of the fundamental principles, but also allow the necessary elaboration to contextualize what we saw as the lessons of past, particularly the way in which the experience of slavery and colonialism has informed our commitment to fairness and justice, having experienced the brutality of one of the worst crimes against humanity in slavery, and the realities of our present and our unbridled ambitions for our future. So a charter that articulates that common purpose of Barbadians of all backgrounds and of all walks of life, having arrived to this land by very different means, but certainly asserting our equality in the process of defining the Barbados that we all want and that we all deserve. The committee was also of the view that the charter would take pride of place among Barbados's national emblems, highly and powerfully symbolic, very much like our flag our anthem, our national pledge, and coat of arms. And this proposal to explore the charter and the sentiment of the Barbadian public through consultation was supported by the government of Barbados. And we were tasked to engage the public to gather their feedback. Of course, again, that consultation was led by my colleague, Senator Rogers, and myself. And on September 23rd, 2021, we published the discussion draft of the charter and welcomed all input. The contents of that discussion draft were based on the engagement that our staff undertook beginning all the way back from March of that year with various individuals, public, private, and civil society entities, as well as the written, oral, and video submissions to our staff, expert observations, and general public discourse on related matters. The discussion draft was shared very widely with special interest organizations and individuals, the press, and members of the general public. And between September 25th and October 8th, we hosted a number of engagements, both closed sessions and public sessions, with a very wide cross-section of people. Over 200 persons were engaged during the closed sessions, and the virtual town halls that were televised and streamed across social media would have attracted well over 34,000 viewers from the social media live streams alone. That doesn't include the numbers of repeat viewers or viewers that would have viewed the program after it would have aired live. And it also saw significant participation from people throughout the Barbadian diaspora. These engagements, public was asked to consider questions such as, what are your thoughts on the new Charter of Barbados? How do you want to redefine the Barbados social contract? What are our obligations to and amongst one another in Barbados? And what do you want to see highlighted in the new Charter? So, I'm going to move very quickly along because I really want to get to hear some of the feedback since this particular consultation would have begun. But I want to say that in the process of our consultation, there was a lot of conflation of the constitutionally related and justiciable, legally actionable matters and the matters of the Charter within a lot of the submissions that we received. And while it was explained that the Charter as presented would be non-justiciable and it wouldn't be entrenched within the Constitution, there was a significant representation by members of the public calling for the justiciability of the Charter to be considered within these very consultations. We had matters raised such as the rights of the child, the rights, access, and even more specifically, the economic enfranchisement of people with disabilities, articulation of the right to family, and all related matters such as child care, matters of land ownership, economic enfranchisement, and more of the type of ring fencing that's been seen with green energy to be applied to areas such as medicinal cannabis for local investment and participation, calls for greater community participation through local governance, gaps in legislation as it relates to female reproductive rights, et cetera, et cetera. So I will close now and say that there was an overwhelming expression of support by the Barbadian public to embrace the concept of what a charter is and what it is supposed to represent and the general nature of the function of a charter. That very powerful symbolism as a recommitment to and amongst ourselves, as individuals, as institutions, and as a state. That was very widely acknowledged. And that overarching sentiment that was expressed to our committee was that the Charter as presented and as explained rejected the historically held idea that Barbados belongs to only one set of people. And they embraced the fact that it moves towards the idea that Barbados belongs to all of us. And I really want to reiterate that. Barbados is all of ours. When we say equality, we mean it in its truest sense. That was the context from which the charter emerged. So I will pause here and pass off to the audience, and I look forward to engaging with each and every one of you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Sharita. I think that you've really put it in context for everyone who is joining us here, and we thank you definitely for joining us here and to the persons who are joining us across the online platforms. Those of you on the online platforms, you are able to contribute in the various comment sections and so on, and we will get that, and I will be it will be fed to me here. And those of you who are here to make submissions in person, as you see, we have the microphone right here for you. And just before we get to that, I want to echo what the chair said in the beginning with regard to we are asking you that on the first occasion, of course, time permitting, you can always come back another time, but on the first occasion that you keep it to 5 minutes. And in the second instance, we're talking about things that are uniquely Barbadian, and we're coming up to the 30th of November. I know that we all agree that one thing that is definitely characteristic of all of us and of our national identity is respect for people. And we can, in a small country, disagree passionately with each other, but we can do so in a civilized and respectful and courteous way. And we all know it. And so the Commission fully expects that all engagements will be done in that manner. So as the chairman said, nothing that is defamatory, nothing that is disparaging of a person or a group of persons or anything of that nature. Because as Barbadians, we're better than that. We are able to disagree and disagree passionately, but in a very respectful way. And so with that, we welcome our first contributor. Please come to the microphone and have your say. There are quite a number of you here, and I'm sure I've seen many of you eagerly trying to get up. So please, come. Yes, I see quite a few members of the audience in hushed conversation between them, I guess, trying to decide who will come first. But sir, thank you very much, sir, for getting us the ball rolling tonight. Please remember that when you come to give us your name for the record and you go into your submission.
It's not on?
It's on now.
Okay. Hello, my name is David Brathwaite. And actually, I'm here because I watched the previous presentations and I kind of found, from what I saw, an atmosphere that seemed hostile to me, right, from what I was seeing. I mean, one of the comments, the comment in the last session, where someone was saying that unless they got their way, there would be riots on the streets, didn't seem respectful, didn't seem like the right context, and that disturbed me because as a Barbadian, I want to be able to say, this is a, as has been said, we are all one. We have different views, we come from different places, but we have been able to forge a society, and that society includes all kinds, right? Whether you are religious, non-religious, what have you. And I was profoundly disturbed by that, and some other ones, and some of the previous ones as well. I was profoundly disturbed. I found it not to be respectful of certain groups within the society, and I think we need to recognize that, what we're here for, right? We're here to try to make a better Barbados. And a better Barbados doesn't mean that everybody's going to get exactly what they want, because by virtue of the fact that we are all here and we have different opinions, different perspectives, we have to work out something. It is a political process, of course it is. We can't, whatever we say is not party political, but it is a political process. And we need to be able to recognize that in doing politics of any kind, it still needs to be respectful. That was my first contribution. Now, the other part of my contribution, has to do with the fact that the society is not, as it stands, is not as even as we would like to think, right? We like to exclude people and do all kinds of things that are not fair, and we think it is fair, we think it is right. And, you know, I think, you know, the way I would like to look at it, I keep saying to myself, you know, I look at the old saying, people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. To me, a much more important formulation is that persons who live in stone houses shouldn't throw glass. And what I mean by that is that we need to recognize whatever group we are in, we may be in our ivory towers, and we are not looking and thinking or being sensitive to where other people are at and what their rights are. We call ourselves a Christian society. I personally don't subscribe to that view because I think we are a secular society from the time we disenfranchised the church in whatever, 1967, 1969, whatever. So we're not quote unquote Christians, we are majority Christian. But let's take one example. School prayer. Everybody that don't want to be in school prayer outside in the sun, whilst those that are, you know, whilst the Christian group are inside the hall and they're doing what they want to do. To me, that is not a fair perspective. The Muslims, the Rastas, the Hindus, the whatever, isn't there a space that can be made available for them to have their, is it devotion or reflection, right? I mean, why not, right? What about persons who do not have an idea or who are essentially agnostic or atheists? What about them? You know, you can't go into any place in Barbados and have any kind of formal meeting without having to have a Christian prayer. I mean, and it doesn't take away from anybody else to say, well, okay, this is not the place for it. You have your place for it. It doesn't take anything from anybody. But the idea is that persons feel that they're a thing. I mean, another thing, I grew up in a neighborhood in which people will come up there, what they used to call open air meetings, and blast for the whole night till 11, 12 o'clock. You couldn't call the police simply because that's how it was, you know. But if your neighbor had a loud speaker playing noise, you can say, well, I'm being disturbed. And so what I'm saying is that position of privilege that Christians need to understand where they are in the society and be able to be more respectful of the general, you know, of everybody. And that's all I have to say for now. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Brathwaite, for, as Sharita said, being brave to start the ball rolling when so few others wanted to. So thank you. Yes, sir. Welcome back.
Oh, dear. Hi, I'm Jabari Jones. I think the preamble of the Constitution should make some mention of sustainability, of considering the need for future generations to use our resources. That's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. If you watch these meetings, you know that Mr. Jones is one of our most frequent contributors. So thank you. Ms. Granham wishes to make a comment.
Hi, good evening again. Thank you to both Mr. Brathwaite and Mr. Jones. Mr. Brathwaite, you might have noticed I was smiling very broadly throughout your contribution because you touched on some very critical matters. I think at the center, at the core of it all is the conversation around morality and what that represents for us all. I think from a professional and personal standpoint that matters of morality are both relative and subjective. I don't think anyone can legitimately argue that we are questioning the right of any institution of faith to define the scope of religious, moral or immoral acts amongst themselves. However, as it pertains to the law, the law really has to approach matters of morality from a secular position. And there is a distinction to be drawn between secular morality and religious morality. And please permit me to remind us all that Barbados is not a theocracy. This is a democracy. And if, if that were not the case, and we began to list all of the thoughts and the actions categorized as religiously immoral, half of this room, and I am speaking hypothetically, of course, could very well end up before the law courts tomorrow morning for offenses ranging from telling lies to drinking and consuming pork and shellfish and all the range of things. I haven't even touched on premarital sex and adultery. So that point about glass houses was very, very, very well made. Thank you, sir. I do think we would very quickly run out of space in the prisons if the law was not taken from a secular perspective. And there really is no real secular justification for legal discrimination against interest groups or special interest groups or minorities. And quite frankly, all attempts to discriminate against such groups can really be traced back to bigotry and, in a lot of cases, religious tenets. So, that being said, I look forward to the rest of the contributions.
Thank you, Sharida. Do we have our another contributor? I recognize tonight's audience a little shy. I'm not sure why.
Is it me?
As you know, as I said, we have we start the innovation with an external panelist who has some expertise on the subject matter under discussion. And today that is Ms. Grant. I'm not a member of the commission, but certainly well versed in the subject matter. Yes, sir. Please give us your name.
My name is Hudson Ennis. Previously they said 5 to 7 minutes, so now I see we've been reduced to 5 minutes. I hope I'll get at least 6 minutes and give me a little time after the bell rings. The Constitution of Barbados states in its preamble, the people of Barbados proclaim that they are a sovereign nation founded upon principles that acknowledge the supremacy of God, the dignity of the human person, their unshakable faith in fundamental human rights and freedoms, and the position of the family in a society of free men and free institutions. I want to focus on these three principles: the supremacy of God, the unshakable faith of human rights, which in itself implies acknowledgement of the dignity of the human person, and thirdly, the position of the family in society. The first one, the supremacy of God. Many persons have interpreted the disestablishment of the Anglican Church in 1969 as the secularization of Barbados. And we heard arguments again tonight that Barbados, to the effect that Barbados is a secular society. It was not the secularization of Barbados. Under the Anglican Church Act of 1969, the Church of England ceased to be established by law. What this did was to level the playing field, requiring the Anglican Church to provide for its own finances and manage its own affairs, just as all the other Christian denominations were required to do. The Anglican Church effectively lost its preferential treatment. The law did not establish a secular society. The Barbados Population Census of 2010, which is the most recent census available, records 23.9% of Barbadians as Anglican, 19.5% Pentecostal, 5.9% Adventist, 4.2% Methodist, 3.8% Roman Catholic, 18.3% other Christian, and 21.8% with no religious affiliation. In summary, 75.6% of the population profess to be Christians, and 24.4% of the population were non-Christian. What further evidence is required to show that Barbados is unquestionably a Christian society? This is an official government population census and is available on the government information website. Reference to the supremacy of God must therefore remain unchanged in the Constitution. Secondly, our unshakable faith in human rights. Article 2 of the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights states, "Everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status." These are all fundamental human rights that were established and agreed to by the United Nations member countries and were consistent with our Constitution when we first became independent in 1966. However, in 1981, our independent nation joined 23 other Caribbean and Latin American countries and signed and ratified the American Convention on Human Rights, which is enforced by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, the IHR, and in so doing appears to have ceded the sovereignty of our courts to the IHR. It should be noted that the USA never ratified this treaty and continues to execute murderers at will, something that adherence to this convention apparently prevents Barbados from doing. In 2018, in response to a question raised by Costa Rica concerning the obligation of member states to implement recent changes to the convention, that is the American Convention on Human Rights, the IHR issued a clarification statement reiterating that all member states, and that includes Barbados, must recognize and guarantee the rights that are derived from a family bond between people of the same sex. This includes marriage. It requires governments to guarantee access to all existing forms of legal domestic systems, including the right to marriage, to ensure the protection of all rights of families formed by same-sex couples without discrimination. Clearly, this will ultimately lead to the adoption of children by same-sex couples. Article 1 of the Charter of Barbados includes the terms gender and sexual orientation, and these terms have also been included in the recent legislation passed, and you know which pieces of legislation I'm referring to. By including these terms, Barbados seems to be following its obligations to the American Convention of Human Rights.
If you can wrap up, because your 5 minutes.
I got 5 minutes already?
Yes, you have 5:20 or 5:30 now.
Okay.
Yeah, so please just, if you wrap up, please.
Well,
yes, you can come back.
I'll come back. I want to deal with the third one.
Okay.
The third one, just a reminder, is the position of family in society.
Okay.
But I hope I have made the point clearly that I wanted to make.
Thank you, Mr. Ennis. Our next contributor, please.
Good evening. My name is Raven Gill, and I'm going to do a speech. So, when will our leaders lead? Our people are watching. Our people are taking notes. Are we so blinded and hardened?
Gill, we're not hearing as such. If you can come a little closer and speak a little louder, please.
When will our people lead? When will our leaders lead? Our people are watching. Our people are taking notes. Are we so blinded and hardened that we can no longer hear the cries of humanity? Leaders must not fail those who elected them to lead. If our existence is to mean anything, we must act in the interest of all people who are depending on us. And if we do not follow the path of greed and destruction, selfishness to sow the seeds of our common destruction, we can work with who are ready to go because the train is ready to leave. And those who are not yet ready, we continue to ring circle and remind them that their people and citizens need them. That was part of the speech of the Prime Minister at the climate change space in 2021. When will the church's persecution end? This modern day lynching of people that do not bend to your way. You cling to the phrase, daunting and explanatory, honor your father and mother, love your neighbor as you yourself. Judge not that you not be judged, for the judgment that you pronounce you will be judged with the measure that you use to measure. That's in Matthew. You hate yourselves, so you therefore cannot love your neighbors. Most of you here have not had a basic conversation with a transgender person. Half of you have never spoken to a disabled person. All of you self-identified Christians here worship a white Jesus in the churches that you go to, an unseen God that you constantly, decade after decade, year after year, is shown on television, in books, and in other doctrines that you willfully and intensely follow without question.
Ms. Gill, please make the point, but if you could temper some of the comments. But you can go ahead and make the point, but temper some of those comments, please.
The basis of your discrimination and opposition to gender neutrality and LGBT is willful ignorance. LGBT people have been the victims of self-identified religious groups and constant and unprovoked harassment about the things you deem as sinful acts. Placed on us by you who turn a blind eye to the same religious pillars that allow you to minimize things that you believe the LGBT community, their sins are greater than any that you commit. The LGBT community does not engage in the same ferocious attack styles that you use towards us, towards our existence. Whether you like it or not, we will get protective laws and language that recognizes us, not just as a minority group, but as citizens and as humans, by family and loved ones and friends, and by the same God that you worship, that we also worship. Because for some reason you think that we do not worship the God that you worship. Protected as citizens because we voted just like everyone else in this room who voted in this same government. Self-identified Christians here keep repeating we do not want gender-neutral language, no to LGBT protections in the Constitution. But if we already had these protective and inclusive laws for LGBT persons, what else would you come up here to this microphone and relentlessly make noise about? Marijuana, abortion, bus fare education, to castigate people that you do not deem as worthy. Ladies and gentlemen, this is hypocrisy, this is not unity. Religious groups get certain privileges, opinions valued more, and not the same that marginalized groups get. Whether these privileged groups have the right to dictate how others should and should not navigate lives. Your groups having the freedom, ability, and rights to serve and worship God openly, but we cannot live our lives openly. Why is that? We want these same privileges, no less, no more. The ability, rights, and freedoms to identify and be respected as humans. And as adults, we are not advocating for our children's rights. That's your job, to raise your children and treat them how you see fit. As adults, we want respect. And if you cannot respect us, that's between you and God. Stay out of LGBT people's adult lives. Since you're not a part of this community, mind your business.
Ms. Gill, your time.
That's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Gill. Can we have our next contributor, please? Thank you. And after the gentleman, then we will. Come, please come, and we will.
Yes, good night, everyone.
Good night.
Yes, my name is Kerry New.
Sorry, sir,
Kerry New.
Okay.
Now, how to put it? I was glancing through the charter 2 days ago, and well, some of the comments tonight with reference to religion and so on came to mind as I was glancing through and listening tonight. And I'm of the opinion that with reference to the charter, you mentioned respect tonight. And within the charter, the new charter, they have a section on respect. Now, to solve the religious problem, I think we should include something with reference to respecting belief and non-belief. You could tell me if I'm wrong, if it's included in there. I don't see it, but respecting the rights of belief or non-belief, persons who believe, persons who don't believe. I think that should be included. And with reference to the LGBT community, yes, in Barbados you're going to have a challenge with reference to the Christian community and the development of ideas. I think persons need to respect persons' ideas. I think we should be more concerned with the well-being of each other. And so long as it is not affecting you in a negative way, I think we should be concerned with the well-being of each other. So, for instance, I've heard mention about the sexual orientation shouldn't be included or even shouldn't be part of it. Who you're attracted to is, your business. Who you like is who you like. And so long as it's not affecting anyone personally in their development, I think it should be passed by the wayside. So respecting of rights to believe and to not believe, I think that's my contribution. That should be in the charter, the respect section in the charter. Thank you, people.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lane. But before that, I think that Reverend Dr. Rogers wishes to make a point. So.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Kerry. I don't know if the section on the diversity speaks to what you would have been speaking of, where it says, we acknowledge the multi-faith heritage of our society and we appreciate the value added to our religious and spiritual culture by the diversity of all faith communities and spiritual entities, and their continuing capacity to have a strong and lasting influence on the quality of life in Barbados. You were saying that there should be something more added to that? Yes, you can come in.
Yeah, because when you say faiths, different faiths, I consider non-belief. I don't consider non-belief as a faith. Right, so I think there needs to be a separation.
Spiritual entities too.
Spiritual entities? Non-belief has nothing spiritual included in there at all. If you believe nothing, you believe nothing. Right, so yes, yeah. I think I guess you could put it that way, but it would be more clear if you include non-belief or lack of belief, something of that sort, because everything isn't spiritual for some people, Pardon? Non-theist. Yeah, something along those lines.
If you say creed doesn't have to be faith, creed, and I think that was the submission I made when I submitted to the commission.
I'm not sure. Are you? Yeah. The online audience would not be able to hear, but are you? Is it going to be a short comment, Mr. Brathwaite? Okay.
Yeah. In my submission to the commission when they were doing the charter, I suggested that we use the word creed because creed to me suggests more than just belief. So you can say beliefs and all that, but you should also mention creed to include persons who do not subscribe to a particular religion. Those who are agnostic or atheists, that will cover them. And the other thing, which probably is more controversial, is that if we have people who are saying the word in the beginning of the preamble should be God, and people say it should be creator, I don't even know why that is necessary, right? But, that's one I'm prepared to lose because I know I will lose on that one. But the idea to me should be that really and truly we are here because we are human. Our rights are derived from our status as human beings and nothing more. We are human beings and citizens, full stop.
Thank you, Mr. Brathwaite.
I need it a little lower.
Could we? She can't get it lower.
Huh? Tilt, okay. Thank you, sir. Oh, help me. Thanks, sir. Good night. My name is Veronica Evelyn. Now, we can see clearly that we do have a problem, and we are defining the nature of the new republic. The question asked was, do we believe that the preamble in the Ford Commission should be adopted? And my answer is yes, but with some modification. And I'll look at those modifications. After paragraph 5, which begins, we recognize the profound changes that have taken place in Barbados and the outside world. I suggest that we add a parallel paragraph that speaks to the profound changes in values. Example, we recognize that after the decades of the 20th century, which led to a state of moral decay, we have an abiding need for spiritual and intellectual renewal. And that text is taken from the Hungarian Constitution of 2011, and that paragraph was retained when it was amended in 2013. I think in Barbados, we need to do something like that, because as I listen, all of us, let's be real, we have a problem. And our basic problem is, are we going to continue to subscribe to the notion of a God who sets his standards of right and wrong, or are we going to take it upon ourselves to set our own standards of what is right and what is wrong? That's basically where we're at. Secondly, in terms of logical sequence, and I thank the Commission, I love the way you say, have your say. And all of us as citizens, we think differently, but we need to have our say. And we need to have our say without being criticized and castigated and maligned. We need respectfully to listen to each other. In terms of logical sequence, I suggest that you reorder paragraph 6, which is A in the current constitution. Why do I say that? In terms of logical sequence, God comes before human beings. How did we get here? We acknowledge him first and foremost, so that what we would say is founded upon principles that acknowledge the supremacy of God. The Ford Commission says, founded upon principles that acknowledge the dignity and worth of the human person, the fundamental rights and freedoms of the individual, the central role of the family in a free society, and the supremacy of God. I also suggest that you add the word equal as a qualifier to dignity and worth. In other words, you'd say the equal dignity and worth of the human person. The revised paragraph would then read, reaffirm that the sovereignty of the people and the nation of Barbados is founded upon principles that acknowledge the supremacy of God, the equal dignity and worth of the human person, the fundamental rights and freedoms of the individual, and the central role of the family in a free society. And I'm winding up. Paragraph B of the current constitution was not included in the Ford Commission preamble. This should be added to the revised constitution with changes. So change there to our, and change men to human beings. so that it reads, "We reaffirm our belief that human beings and institutions remain free only when freedom is founded upon respect for moral and spiritual values and the rule of the law." I notice that in the approved constitution, moral and spiritual was changed to moral and sensible. And then in paragraph 8, I don't have the language because this is not my forte, but I think when it talks about the powers of government, you can add something that speaks to the ability of the people to call for, to recall an MP if he's underperforming. It probably isn't well expressed, is not my area, but I think we need to do that.
Your time, Dr. Evelyn, is up, so if you could just say concluding.
I'm up to. So I just want to say that in terms of word choice and careful sentence structure, we need to make it plain. What do we really want? Do we want God at all, or do we want ourselves to make our own rules and live as we want to?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Reverend Dr. Rogers wishes to make a comment.
Yes? Yeah, go ahead.
Hello? Oh. You said that something was changed in the Constitution from moral and spiritual to moral and sensible. Where is this?
Yeah, I have it there. In the approved charter. In the approved charter.
Okay, you can look for it and come back. Because I'm reading the Constitution here and it reads moral and spiritual. Okay, you said Constitution, that's why I asked. Okay, all right.
In the Constitution, it's moral and spiritual.
Right.
But in the approved charter, it's moral and sensible.
Okay.
I'll give you the stuff. Actually, I will give you a written copy of
yes,
this.
we expect that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Granham also wished to make a remark.
Yes, that's okay, great, it's on. My first response is to Mr. Lane. Where is he? So thank Mr. Kerry. Is Kerry Haynes? Neil? Kerry Neal. Sorry. My age is showing. So thank you very much for your contribution. And I agree with you, you know, for the most part. I don't find anything that you said that was disagreeable. You are correct that when we speak of equality, we have to consider all sides, all ends of the spectrum as it pertains to beliefs. And I think that if you would take a look at the preamble section of the charter, we attempted a compromise, and this was following some of the public consultation and the responses to the discussion draft, to ensure that even if we wanted to maintain the nod to faith-based community, that we ensured that we also gave that nod and gave visibility and consideration to those of no faith and those in between. So the section I'm speaking to says, underscoring the fact that we are all equal by virtue of our humanity in the eyes of the Creator. And let me speak to why the use of the word Creator. Or all faith-based communities are not Christian and do not subscribe to quote-unquote God. And we sought to embrace all, again, staying true to the nature of equality and representing everyone. And also, so let me restart. Underscoring the fact that we're all equal by virtue of our humanity in the eyes of the Creator and according to the laws of this land regarding of our ancestry. So we sought to capture that balance in that section. I also want to mention that the section that you spoke to around respect, I think that's captured under Article 2, yes. The first paragraph under Article 2. That speaks to that duty of care that we have for one another. Respect in this sense was meant to extend beyond simply the religious context. It's really supposed to speak to respect in all aspects of our lives. So in that regard, I think it does capture, paying homage to all faiths, all non-faiths, all beliefs, etc., etc. So I hope that satisfies your concern. And now on to Dr. Evelyn's comments. I won't speak to the recommendations because I am not a member of the commission that is receiving said recommendations. I'm sure, right? And I don't think they will speak to them in this particular forum. But please be assured that they are noted. But I wanted to first express my disappointment that this conversation has been so skewed around a handful of words that appear in this very substantive, very robust charter. This charter represents so much more than just the two sexual orientation and the word creator. And I sincerely hope that we can take the time to analyze and address and discuss all of the other equally relevant and equally important and equally critical matters of our national development within the context of this forum. So that is one. And two, a lot of what you said, Dr. Evelyn spoke to duty of state. What is the duty of state as it pertains to human rights? And I want to emphasize that the state has three basic duties as it pertains to human rights. The first is that it has a duty to respect by refraining from interfering. It has a duty to protect by preventing others from interfering. And it has a duty to fulfill by creating the conditions for the access to said rights. And the principles which underlie fundamental human rights and freedoms are fairness, respect, freedom, dignity, and equality. Now, that being said, there is an extraordinarily high standard and established processes where a state is required to meet with regards to denial of certain rights under very specific circumstances. And one example I can think of is perhaps imprisonment. All right? But fundamental rights are the entitlement of each and every person by virtue of simply being human. There's no other qualification required. And a religious or faith-based group's insistence is not justification enough to deny a fundamental right. Neither does declaring a practice or a behavior sinful demonstrate an actual harm or detrimental effect to society. So I think it's important to note that. Yes, opinions and diversity of opinion is important, but the reality is the very rights that you are entitled to extend to everybody else. That's the reality of human rights. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Granham. I think that we had the gentleman in the patterned shirt first, and then I recognize the gentleman in the blue.
Good night to each and every one of you guys here. I must say this is the first time I've been a part of some town hall meeting like we are here right now.
Your name, sir?
Lancelot Myers. Yeah. Lancelot Myers, yeah.
Thank you.
And, it's a privilege to be here even at this point because I've never been a part of this kind of environment, and it's more so now that I'm seeing what's going on in this island. By the way, I've been here for 40 years as a citizen here from Guyana. And I sometimes wonder, why is it we have to be going through this kind of episode? Why is it we got to talk about the agendas, about who is who and who is what? We are a Christian society. This country belongs to God, belongs to Jesus. And we should not be in this kind of environment where we are conducting tongue meetings to decide who we want to be, who we want to become. We should not be involved in this kind of environment. It's a waste of time, according to what I feel about this. Listen, God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. I just said it. He made Adam and Eve.
Sir,
he made Adam and Eve.
Sir, you will be allowed to make the points that you want to make, sir. But in keeping with the spirit that we started out with in terms of respect and so on, we're going to need you to temper it a little bit.
So, therefore, man, we have to understand the nature of God. And we got to put God first in this country back again. This country needs to get back to God. Get back to what we know who God is. We said God has been on our side for all these years. And now we're debating whether it's not, we got to be this and be that. Them young people we're growing up, they are confused if they want to be a boy or girl.
Sir.
They're Anyhow, all I want to say is that God is on the people's our side, and we're going to keep God first. Be blessed in Jesus' name.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Sorry, thank you, Mr. Myers. I recognize the gentleman in the blue, and then the gentleman in the gray, and the gentleman in white. Yes.
Good evening. My name is Nicholas Daniel. Good evening. My name is Nicholas Daniel.
First name?
Nicholas. I just wanted to start by saying I think the Charter is a good outline of the ideals for Barbadian society. I believe it outlines many important aspects of what we should strive for as a society, including equal protection under the law for all people, for all members of our society, the importance of having a clean environment, support for CARICOM, and importance of a strong democracy. I believe that Article 1 should be integrated into, I believe it is Section 11 of the current Constitution, or whatever the equivalent section replaces this Constitution. It emphasizes the fact that all Barbadians are equal and deserve full protection of the law and equal treatment of the law, no matter who they are, what they believe, or who they choose to love. Article 1 also speaks to diversity and how it has benefited Barbados. We need to strive to continue to be a diverse society. Article 2 should also be incorporated into the Constitution in some way. It reinforces the idea that we must be a progressive society. I believe it mentions that we, current generations, owe a debt to previous generations, and that we also owe it to the generations coming after us, that we owe it to them to leave it a better place than we have found it. We have to work hard to make sure that we do that. And Article 3, I believe, is about democracy. I might not agree with many of Dr. Evelyn's comments, but I do think that the idea of having recall elections is one that should be looked towards. I also believe that we must enshrine the right to vote for all Barbadians above the age of majority, including those who are imprisoned. And that is my contribution.
Thank you very much, Mr. Daniel. The gentleman in the greenish, grayish top.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
Come a little closer to the microphone.
Is it better now?
Yeah.
Okay, yes. Hi, good evening once more. My name is Tariq Wilson, and I'm a third-year law student at the UWI Phil's Faculty of Law. And I first want to express some gratitude, and I thank you for allowing me to contribute this evening. And I'm particularly excited for these discussions, these thematic discussions, as they perhaps more lend to more robust jurisprudential debate, which I intend to engage this evening. So this evening's theme was the preamble. And the Constitution itself really is supposed to embody the personality of all Barbadians. And that might sound like a mouthful because it is. But when I say that to say that it must reflect all the interests of every single Barbadian, no matter the difference. However, when we look to the current preamble in our Constitution, we see perhaps an acerbic British articulation that makes it seem as though our existence has been a gift from the metropole, it has been a gift from Britain, such that now we are seeking to engage the process of constitutional reform, we have to see now how we can transform that preamble in a way that reflects the modern day interests of Barbadians. And thankfully, we don't have to go far because the Ford Commission did, in its report, recommend a new preamble. And when we look to that preamble as coined by the Ford Commission, we see some constitutional tolerance for our forefathers, we see reference to spiritual diversity and these things. However, in my opinion, I feel, notwithstanding the fact that it is a good base with which our new preamble can be modeled off of, there are some things that perhaps we ought to look at and try to change for the benefit of all Barbadians. So first, when we look to the mention of diversity in spirituality, it is combined with concepts of the rule of law, amongst other things. And I feel as though that if we are to give proper credence to religious diversity, then it must be a standalone provision or a standalone clause, rather, in our preamble. Secondly, this government has been very astute and has been a major proponent in environmental sustainability. And I do believe that the new preamble can make provisions for environmental sustainability, and we can just look to our neighbors, our Capricorn neighbors in Guyana. Their preamble equally recognizes the importance of environmental sustainability. Equally, the human rights or the fundamental rights provisions in the preamble as coined by the Ford Commission doesn't, in my opinion, properly reflect or as adequately reflects the diverse interests or the need for human rights to be reflected in society. And I feel as though the charter, the proposed and now approved charter, more adequately recognizes the diversities within society, whether it be race, whether it be sex, whether it be gender, and perhaps that can be transposed into our new preamble where the Ford Commission has not adequately addressed it. I also want to address the inclusion of youth. There's a saying that goes, we don't inherit our country from our ancestors, rather we borrow it from our children. And the reality is this constitution not only governs us now, but it governs those who are to come after us. And I do believe that if we are to give credence to that aforementioned statement, aforementioned quote, that we must have some inclusion of the youth interests in the preamble. And it might sound like a bit tough to wrap your mind around, but again, I would want to draw a reference to the Constitution of Guyana, who equally recognizes the youth interests in their preamble.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. And certainly if I take off my commissioner hat for a moment, I'm sure that the public would agree that the Faculty of Law and its students have a lot to offer. And so we look forward to written submissions from law students like yourself, Mr. Wilson. I believe that Ms. Granham wanted to make a response. Okay.
Okay, age before beauty? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tariq. I have to say how happy I was to see someone your age come up so boldly and so bravely. My friend here in the blue shirt as well. These true youth, not some of the ones who masquerade that I see in the back of the audience, that have been deducting a few years off their age for the last 5 or so years. No name, no blame, no lockup. But I do agree with you. And our committee would have made some recommendations with regards to the preamble as well. I want to speak specifically to the Ford Commission's recommendations around the preamble. There would have been strong criticisms of the existing preamble of the Constitution dating as far back as 1998 when the Ford Commission made its recommendations, and mainly on the following grounds: that there was no reference to the historical fact of slavery, which is a central element of the evolution of the Barbadian polity, that it commences with a blatantly anti-historical, and might I add revisionist, claim that the love of free institutions and of independence has always strongly characterized the inhabitants of Barbados, we have suffered our way to that wisdom. And the reference to the supremacy of God may plausibly be interpreted as excluding non-Christians from the purview of the Constitution. Now, let me remind you, I just read that as an exact quote from the Ford Commission's report from 1998. The Ford Commission also explained that some constitutions have no preamble, and that while preambles are not generally considered to be essential, they supported and strongly supported the view that we could have a preamble, and we needed preamble to speak to the inspirational and links between periods of history and mirroring development of the nation. So everything you said, Tariq, bang on. I want to, who was it, Mr. Myers? Lancelot? Hi, yes. There's a quote I'm gonna pass off to Senator Rogers, but I want to ask him to begin with a quote, a Voltaire quote that I recall him using very, very often, and I will piggyback on that as my response to you, Mr. Myers, and I really hope that you take it in the nature that it is intended. Yes?
I don't know why Ms. Granum is putting me in trouble, but it was Voltaire who said, "I may not agree with what you say, but I'll defend your right to say it." So we'll operate in that spirit here. Tariq, in the charter under Article 2, I think we mentioned, this was a big discussion because we thought that there was not enough on the youth and children there, but there is something here in speaking about raising our children, understanding who children are and the critical role they have in our present future. And we shall prioritize, protect, guide, nurture, heal, and love all our children. But I do take your point that more perhaps can be said in terms of the youth. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Rogers and Ms. Granum. We will take the gentleman in the white hat, the lady in the black, Mr. Innes. Yes, Mr. Innes can come back, and then the lady in the purple.
Good night. My name is Troy Hunt. I'll keep this as short as possible. Well, I'm not going to talk just now. The youngster to talk before me.
Sorry, your name again, sir?
Troy Hunt.
Troy Hunt, okay.
I got kudos to that man. He was on Tariq. Anyways, I'm an atheist. Probably atheist at that. I raise my children secularly, and they turn out pretty all right. I teach them to respect people's opinions. You don't necessarily have to agree with them, right? And for the religious folk among you, I believe you have the right to worship whosoever you choose to worship. I have no issue with that. I am a cis heterosexual male, and for my brothers and sisters in the LGBT community, all that is asked of them or for them is a little humanity, a little empathy, right? And although my anti-religious hat would let me do bad at certain things, I know there's a time and a place, and sometimes we have to bite the bullet a little bit, sister. You get me? You get me, sister? You have to bite the bullet a little bit. Yes. And just let us all get along. Times are changing, and Barbados got to step into the 21st century anyways, right? And I just think that we should treat each other the way we want to be treated, without the threat of religious implications of dying and going to hell, and you can't see me as equal. I don't think that's fair. Just think that all of us should be able to get along. And that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. The lady in the black.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Nastasia Rambaran. So I'll just like to start off by saying I really appreciate the committee's decision to change or modify the process this evening to kind of tamp down the hateful rhetoric and hate speech.
No. No.
I didn't hear.
We're not going to describe contributions as hateful rhetoric and hate speech, man.
No. To stop that. Yes.
Okay.
I appreciate that effort has been made because in the past meeting, that was very prevalent and it was very disturbing and traumatizing. So thank you very much. On that note, though, with the committee's work, I would really appreciate some clarification going forward as to how this process factors into the final analysis of how the Constitution is modified or reformed. I know you've mentioned some of the factors that will factor in, but I would really like to get some idea of the weighting and the scoring that is accorded to each element, because I find it's kind of opaque as it is. Specifically with regards to the charter, again, applaud the charter. I think a lot of work went into it. I really appreciate most of it and the elements, especially about colonialism, our dark legacy of enslavement, and acknowledging our indigenous past. I think I would propose as well, instead of gender identity be included, but also in Article 1, where there are forms of intolerance and abuse listed, I think sexual abuse needs to be included in there. It has been omitted. All the other forms have been written out, but sexual has not been named, and it's especially heinous, as you would know. And I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With regard to the question related to the process issues, the Commission is still very much, as the Chairman puts it, in the listening and reading mode, and so we have not quite entered the phase of the decision making. And when it comes to that particular phase, the chair would agree that we will consider submissions that are made to us. So we will consider the written submissions, the oral submissions, the town halls, and everywhere else that we engage with persons. We will consider all of those submissions in being able to come, in being able to formulate our recommendations. It is important, and I thank you, Ms. Rambaran, for the opportunity to say that the Commission is tasked with the final product being not only a report of our recommendations, which is what the other two commissions, the Ford and the Cox Commission, were tasked with, but we are also charged with providing drafting instructions for the drafting of an actually a new constitution. And in that effort, the government has provided to us the services of retired Justice of Appeal Sherman Moore, who is himself a highly experienced legislative drafter. And so our final output as a commission will be a report of our recommendations, a report of submissions that we have received and our recommendations, as well as a draft constitution. That is, however, not the end of the road. Our output will have to be considered by the Cabinet, and the Cabinet will make the decision that, precisely. The Cabinet will make a decision, but that is not the end of the road either. Because as you are well aware, constitutional amendments, and an amendment can include, within the definition of amendment is the idea of entirely taking away and replacing, require, well, the most important sections, so to speak, require a special procedure in Parliament. And so if the Cabinet does agree, and it goes forward, it would have to be approved by a 2/3 majority in both houses of Parliament. And so the final outcome really is not in the hands of the Commission. But our work, we feel, will be made as best as it can be by receiving as many submissions from the public as possible to inform a report that looks like Barbados and that is representative of the people of Barbados, and a constitution of which, a draft constitution of which the public can be proud. And that is certainly our commitment to you on behalf of my colleagues. Miss, you wanted to make a response, Sharita?
Yes. I was a little distracted. Thank you. May I call you Nastasia? Yes, thank you so much. And I have to admit that I am embarrassed that we did not catch that omission. I think it may have been taken for granted that it was implied, but your point is well taken. Thank you. And if I could give a very, very quick insight into how we got to the amendments that were made to the discussion draft in the charter process. A critical part of that process was that the committee, when assessing those recommendations, the committee remained mindful of the nature of learned and entrenched prejudices of people, and each submission that was received was considered under a very, very simple assessment rubric, which sought to maintain key principles, and those are that the charter is not the domain or the instrument of any one group or select groups of people, that the rights-based ideals of respect, partnership, and diversity must be reflected in the intent and the substance of the charter. The charter must not be used as an instrument of oppression or exclusion, and that the charter must maintain the balance of rights, freedoms, and duties of citizen to state and state to citizen. So I hope that offers a little bit of clarity into our process. And I need to reinforce that our process is separate and distinct from the process of this commission, which has kindly invited me to participate in tonight's proceedings.
Thank you very much, Ms. Granum. Thank you very much. We have, yes, Ms. Haran in the purple, and then we will take Mr. Innes. Is Mr. Innes still here? Yes, Mr. Innes, you can return for about 2 to 3 minutes, if you wish.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. Taitu Haran. First, I want to thank everyone here who has been listening so attentively. I appreciate the comments. I think one of the things that comes to mind in terms of this process that I've been listening to so far and the previous meetings is that there is space for everyone. And the challenge with the constitutional reform process is that it pushes a lot of buttons about who is welcome, who is not welcome, who is included, who is excluded. But I think the spirit of the charter is an opportunity, not just the charter, but the Constitution is an opportunity for us to remember that there is space for everyone, and therefore there's also an opportunity for us to grow and expand to welcome and include all members of the human family in Barbados. So on that note, I wanted to affirm that I do agree with the direction that it is going. I also support what you have included so far. I also want to support the point that Nastasia had made earlier, is to have the Article 1, there's a difference between gender and gender identity and sexual orientation, and I think that distinction should be made. So it's gender, which deals with gender-based discrimination or gender-based affirming of rights and obligations and duties, but also gender identity, which is something else. I think gender identity should be something that should be included, and then sexual orientation, which is already included. The second thing that I think we need to probably pay attention to is looking at Article 3, which focuses on democracy. I like the spirit of the several paragraphs that are there, but like my colleague that had spoken before me, I think I think we have enough reason to name the spirit of increasing youth participation. We know the pattern of our democracies has been very, at the risk of being, I don't want to be, well, I'm 51, so it's okay. But our democracy has a tendency to be ageist. And I think we can strengthen the spirit of our democracies across the Caribbean, including Barbados, strengthen its innovativeness when we allow for greater youth participation in a meaningful way, not just the youth parliament, but in a meaningful way in allowing for even a quota of seats. Now, while my recommendation for quota is not something that can be put in the charter, what I'm suggesting is that the idea of including youth participation as a value to strengthen democracy should be put in the charter. And then my second one, or third rather, is children. Similarly, when we talk about all human beings, all citizens, and so on, I think somehow we forget about children. Sometimes children have to be pointed out. There's a way in which even how the Constitution of Barbados only has one article that specifically addresses children. And I think in this iteration, we do need to speak specifically to the protection of children and the centrality of children as citizens in their own rights, and not just when they reach 18, when they become an adult. So that's my third point. My last one, and I want to just, is more an expression of appreciation. I appreciate the idea of including the word creator as opposed to God. I'm not a Christian, so I've had to be tolerant in meetings that are, full of Jesus and the Lord and so on. And Jesus Christ is not my Lord and Savior, but I have to be there with other people who do that. I don't conform in a sense that I don't bow my head, I don't do all those things that Christians do, but in respect of their religion, I'm there in prayer with them, even though I'm not doing it in their form. So I like the idea of creator because it acknowledges that other spiritual paths who accepted a divine source can also be included, and the word creator is, I believe, inclusive, whether it's Allah, whether it's God, whether it's Olodumare, and so on. I think that's a good way to put it, and I appreciate that. I just wanted to express that appreciation. And then the final thing was more of a question. You started to talk about it, but I would love to be able to find out if the substance of the charter, what aspects of it are you considering to be judiciable, as well as those that you're considering that are not going to be judiciable, because then that is another set of discussions that may be quite enthusiastic, I'm sure. So that's where I'll leave it for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Haran. Ms. Dennis?
Yes, thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak again. A lot has been said this evening about the Charter, and it begs the question whether or how much of what has been put into the Charter will actually be made judiciable. That's the word that we've been using a lot tonight. And how much will remain there in the Charter, because the Charter seems to be molding the Constitution. The last point I wanted to talk about was the question of human or unshakable the last one was
family.
The family, position of family in society. And a High Court judge, in lamenting the decline of the Barbadian society, recently included the church among the failing institutions leading to the waywardness we are seeing in our society. Now, people are always quick to blame the church. And my question is, are churches supposed to send around buses to communities, knocking on doors, and dragging children from in front of their television and computer screens to take them to Sunday school? There was a time when parents either took their children to Sunday school or sent them with a responsible adult or a relative. Parents took responsibility for their children. Today, Sunday school has become an optional treat which most children have not acquired a taste for. Today, the traditional family is being reconstructed before our very eyes. And we've seen how parental rights are being removed and children's rights are promoted in ways that were previously thought inconceivable. Commissioners, our Constitution must guarantee the preservation of parental rights to ensure that the traditional structure of families headed by male fathers and female mothers, bringing up sons that are male and daughters that are female, is preserved, so that we do not add to the chaos and confusion that we are already faced with in a society which seems to be spiraling out of control, with our educational and law enforcement authorities seemingly unable to deal effectively with the rapid changes that are leaving us all behind as we sleep. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Ennis. Thank you, Mr. Ennis. I see one more, another contributor, but just so that we don't leave out the online audience, because we do have, I understand, quite a sizable online audience across the various platforms. One question, and I will allow Ms. Granam Sharida to answer it. Why is the inclusion of non-belief so critical? If in our Constitution we have identified the principle of non-discrimination and the protection of human rights, there is no need for specific references. So that is a comment that has been made on one of the platforms. Ms. Granam?
Okay, that's a very tough question to answer, but I will attempt to do so. I'm not sure how many of you here have ever heard of the term tyranny of a majority. Yeah, I see a lot of heads nodding. In the absence of naming specific forms of discrimination, that actually tips the scale in favor of a named and expressed majority. It is really important for a state to not only prioritize vulnerable groups and communities, but also ensure that they remain visible. And in my opinion, that is an extremely justifiable reason for taking the time and around the intent of actually naming specific forms of discrimination. Above and beyond, simply having them top of mind and right in front of your face, I don't see any damage to be done by naming them unless the commenter could, elaborate in terms of what the danger is in naming it. I would like to know what they perceive as the danger in naming or elaborating on those things. While I have the mic, I just want to very quickly mention that in 1969, we spoke to the disestablishment of the state church in 1969. And I think it's important to emphasize that that was more than simply a case of financial matters or procedural matters. That disestablished the concept of a state church and effectively institutionalized the separation of church and state. So I think it's critical to emphasize that. I also think it is absolutely important to speak to the distinction between the fallacy that Barbados is a Christian society versus the fact that Barbados is a predominantly Christian society. And that word predominantly is so important because it acknowledges everyone else. By ignoring that word, we in effect say that we don't care about anybody else but Christians. And I sincerely hope that that is not what the Christian community in this country is expecting or promoting. My understanding of Christianity is that it is a religion that is premised on kindness, respect, tolerance, increasing diversity, and I sincerely hope it continues along that path. So let's not go down that road, please. I think it is respectful to include the word predominantly when we describe the religious landscape of this country and Christianity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Granam. We are fast running out of time, but I have seen one contributor there. Are there any other persons who wish to make a contribution? I think that we will take these the lady at the mic as well as both of you, and then that will be it. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, good evening. My name is Ruwan Mohammed, and I'll try to keep this as brief as I possibly can. I think it's important that the preamble includes a commitment to upholding and protecting equitable human rights. Just like the Charter, which is going in a great direction, there needs to be an unequivocal and really deliberate move to protect vulnerable populations in particular, as well as the identities of everybody who live within this country. And I think as we acknowledge the ways in which colonialism and the legacy of slavery has impacted our societies, that acknowledgement really needs to underscore how colonialism and that legacy of slavery still subjugates people today, like vulnerable communities, including LGBT people, disabled people, and people who exist at the margins of society and don't occupy the majority. I think colonialism really aims to divide and conquer. It did that throughout slavery, and we're still seeing that today. Even though we are independent, even though we're a republic, I think the remnants of colonialism are still striving to divide and conquer and cause strife amongst a population that has been through so much subjugation in all its different diversity. People of all identities are living under the subjugation of colonialism, and rather than trying to cause strife between us, it's really important that as a population we come together and recognize the diversity that exists amongst us and moving to protect the human rights that we all deserve. I think religion, faith, and spirituality are very deeply personal, and there's not a push to strip anybody of their rights to practice their religion. But the protected human right of religious freedom also means exemption from participating in religion. And I don't think any single faith should have the agency to determine what is right and wrong under the law, or strong-arm an entire population of people to follow their beliefs. I think what the law should focus on is upholding the human rights of all people, and human rights should not be left at the discretion of a majority of a population. It shouldn't be up for a vote. Somebody mentioned that 24% of the population is not Christian, and I want to say that 24% of the population matters. What percentage of the population is disabled? You know, do we just say that they don't matter? What percentage of the population are children? Children's rights matter. The rights and the voices and the realities of the minority groups in this country matter, and they deserve to be realized under the full protection of the law. Specifically, because they are so vulnerable, because they are minority populations. I think there's a huge moral panic, and I think it should be acknowledged that the inclusion of minority groups like LGBT people isn't about a free range to corrupt children or destroy families, but marginalized communities also come from families. I'm an LGBT person, and I grew up with a family. Diverse families have always existed. So I think to pretend that LGBT families don't exist, diverse families don't exist, LGBT children don't exist, is really dangerous and harmful to us as a society. There's no harm in visibilizing our differences and our diversity, but there is a huge danger in invisibilizing the realities of vulnerable people in a society. So I think this is about recognizing those vulnerabilities and making sure that people like LGBT people who are prone to violence, and that's undeniable. I think the Constitution has an obligation to act on the human right of protection to violence for specifically vulnerable people. And I think we all contribute to the society, and we all deserve to be protected. And everybody's body autonomy should really be considered as sovereign. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Muhammad. As agreed, the lady in the mint green, and then the lady in the black and white.
All right, hi, good night. My name is Nia Brathwaite. And I'm going to be very short because Ron actually covered quite a few of my points. So my main point really was to kind of say that we're not talking about the reconstruction of traditional families. We're talking about the recognition of realities of families in Barbados that have existed for, I don't know, since we got here on the slave ship. They've existed. They've been families that I'm sure many of us have parents who are not married. Many of us have siblings who we don't share the same parents with. Many of us have grown up with aunts and uncles or grandmothers instead of your mother and father. Many of us know of people who have been in partnerships with a person of the same sex for 20, 30, 40, 50 years and are still together. These exist. They have existed. They continue to exist. And I think all we're asking for is to be recognized and protected in the same way as every other relationship. And families have always been diverse, and we're not trying to reconstruct it, we're just trying to recognize the reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brathwaite, and we take our final submission now. Yes, ma'am.
Pardon me. Good evening. My name is Rosaline Corbin. Pardon me. I stand here acknowledging that I'm a Christian. Acknowledging that I'm a Christian. And it's not the only premise on which I'm standing, but it is fundamental to who I am as an individual and as a Barbadian. I was raised under the assumption I never studied our Constitution. Neither did my grandmother, who was born in 1908 and was shot at in the 1937 riots at the Mount Plantation, scavenging potato scraps and vines to feed her hungry children. My mother, who passed in 2013 at age 82, never studied the Constitution of Barbados, but they all lived, and I lived. In recent time, I've had to go back to my history books. I've had to, especially since we are examining the constitutional reform, I have had to go back as a student to study what has informed us as a nation, an independent nation. I have been part of the pre-independence era, benefiting from a secondary education in the 1960s. Therefore, I have touched all areas in a sense, but what I do recognize is that I was raised under the safety net and the security of a constitution of persons who protected our rights as a nation and as individuals. It might not always have been fair, it might not always have been just, but we do know that our rights in most parts were protected. And therefore, I subscribe to the existing preamble of our Constitution, which declares that the people of Barbados are a sovereign nation founded on principles that acknowledge the supremacy of God, and that's my premise, the dignity of the human person. And I was raised in a rural village. This whole debate that we're having now, where there are groups that seem to want to push an agenda and marginalize others. And I don't want to be scared sometimes to say I'm a Christian. I'm a born-again Christian. Just as I wouldn't like my Muslim brothers and sisters, my own doctor is a Muslim, a very good doctor. And therefore, I recognize the diversity in my country. I was raised in a village where there was a man who used to dress as a woman. And I came along calling him Miss Lucy. He pressed the lady's hair. He pressed my mother's hair. He made clothes for us in the village. He wore a nightgown with curlers in his hair. I respected him. That was the Barbados in which I was raised. No one disrespected Miss Lucy or any other. And Miss Lucy, incidentally, was born on the same day as my mother. and therefore I respected Miss Lucy, whether male or female. I was raised in that Barbados. And I am seeing now, I work with the LGBTQ community, but I am seeing a push to deep separate us, compartmentalize us, and to alienate sectors. And I have this fear. I have this fear of what my Barbados is becoming. I have my fear. I have listened to the meetings and I've been hearing this debate between the Christians and other groups of sexual orientation. This is not what our charter should be like. I would like, therefore, to...
Your time, ma'am.
I would like, therefore, in closing, to remind, and I don't want to be disrespectful, but to remind the head of the commission and the other members that one of the instructions or the mandate of the committee is to pursue reforms or to enable reforms or to guide discussion and have consideration to reforms that would meet the circumstances of a 21st century Barbados. And I am wondering, I've heard no discussion about that 21st century Barbados, the envisioning of that 21st century Barbados that would enable me as a senior person and becoming more senior to live peacefully and to know that my fundamental rights and freedoms, as well as others, those of others.
Thank you, Ms. Corbin. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Corbin. Ms. Corbin, thank you. Ma'am, we have actually run over time, Ms. Corbin, and thank you. I'm not sure if my colleagues wish to make any closing remarks as we wrap up. Reverend Dr. Rogers?
Yes.
In that same vein, we will keep it brief, colleagues.
Based on all that has transpired here tonight, it seems that a broader discussion needs to take place amongst those who are gathered here, because you're all passionate in your positions, but I think that there's a lot more that needs to be heard, and I believe it would be best if you talk to each other on these matters, because I think the last speaker sort of brought things together as one who straddles the two seemingly dissenting groups. But I want to encourage us as Christians, as I am a Christian as well, to recognize that our Bible does acknowledge our Bible. Probably doesn't want me to say that. Our Bible does acknowledge there are people who are different. If you read, for example, there are several passages, but if you read Matthew 19, Jesus' comment in that there are some who are born that way, you should delve a little into that and understand what he's really talking about there. Matthew 19. Just for conversation purposes. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll keep my statements brief. So first point is that I'm really not sure how you're able to reconcile equality and respect while at the same time refusing to recognize entire demographics of our population and their entitlement to the same rights and fundamental freedoms. I think that's a bit of cognitive dissonance. Thank you. Y'all are eating into my time. Let me be... But thank you. And my second point is that I'm not a medical or biological expert. However, I think that when we take religious and individual biases out of the equation, and since this has been such a heavy focus on this evening's discussion, we are left with the simple fact that sexualities are morally neutral, where they involve consenting adults interacting in ways that have no real detrimental effect on the well-being of other people. Hurt feelings or offended moral sensibilities do not qualify. And regardless of the combination of genders or sexuality involved, these relationships are quite frankly only the business of those people who are involved. It is not mine, yours, or the state's business. I also want to speak to something very, very quickly that was brought up in one of the previous sessions. I'm growing very, very concerned about the frequency with which some members of our society are so bold to try to link matters of sexual orientation with matters of pedophilia and bestiality and incest. I think it is desperate, it is not grounded in fact, and otherwise irrelevant. Please stop. Consent is the key determinant for whether a private sexual act should be deemed illegal. Animals, children, and people with certain incapacitations or inanimate objects are incapable of consenting to sexual acts, and there is no comparison to be made to those acts with gay marriage or legally recognized sexual orientations. Please, please, please stop making that comparison. It is false, it is absurd, and it is downright ridiculous. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sharida, and thank you to Reverend Dr. Rogers and the chairman, Mr. Justice retired Christopher Blackman. As we have come to the close of tonight's session, I want to thank all of you who came out tonight in person, as well as those of you who are online, for taking the time out really to attend an event discussing what is a very, very, very important topic for the country at this particular point in time. Yes, and so I want to thank those of you also who stood up to make contributions. Generally speaking, in general, the contributions were civil, and we hope to continue to increase the standard of presentations going forward to ensure that we are stating our opinions and having our say in a way that is respectful of other people. And that word respect really will come to define the public engagement of the Constitutional Reform Commission. I should also tell you that moving forward, as we come down to the wind-up of the year, we will be visited in Barbados very shortly, in another 2 weeks or so, by an international scholar and expert from the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, Dr. Samit Basaria. And he will engage in several activities in Barbados related to constitutional reform. I should perhaps back up to say that International IDEA is perhaps one of the leading constitution building organizations anywhere in the world. And so we are quite privileged to be visited by Dr. Basaria, who is one of their senior persons. Dr. Basaria will engage in a private consultation with the Commission. He will also give a public lecture, and more details of the public lecture will be disseminated via the usual channels, the social media and so on. But importantly though, Dr. Basaria has agreed to facilitate a workshop for civil society. So the idea is that we will invite civil society organizations into this workshop, and Dr. Basaria will impart his vast breadth of knowledge when it comes to constitution building and constitutional reform, so that we will equip and empower civil society organizations to make a very meaningful contribution. Because the foundation of meaningful contributions is, and empowering people really, is information. And so we look forward to that, and all of that information will be featured via the usual channels of the Commission. We continue next month. Of course, next month is a very short month, but we continue next month with Chapter 2 of the Constitution of Barbados, which is citizenship. And we have a provisional date, but I would not want to say that date at this time or the location. And so you will hear very soon about that, but that town hall will be in the early part of December, because of course as we come down to the holiday season, the Commission will pause its public engagement for obvious reasons as we come to the holiday period. And the final analysis, and this is finally, not in the final analysis, finally, this is the last public engagement of the Commission until November the 30th. And so on behalf of my colleagues at the Constitutional Reform Commission, I want to wish all Barbadians a happy but also a very reflective independence as we culminate this month of nationhood and reflect on what it means to be an independent country for 56 years. And indeed, what it means very historically to be a republic. And we are very near to the 1-year anniversary of our historic Republican achievement. And to think deeply about both of those things as we also enjoy the many festivities that are planned. And so with that, I wish all of you a very good night, get home safely, and happy independence.